It's the question that no one in Canton, Massachusetts wants to answer. What if Karen Read never dropped John O'Keefe off at the house that night? What if there's a whole nother narrative? This is True Crime Tuesdays.
Murder, I'm going to circles. Just bought a brand new shovel. Time to bury some myrtles. On True Crime Tuesday, gon' get to that point. I'm having conversations with the voices that I avoid.
So there's been a lot of speculation surrounding the Karen Read trial. A lot of people think that everything that's been said isn't exactly honest or what really happened. I mean, you have the whole theory that they all went over to the Albert's house that night, and she got into a fight with John, Karen did, and that she ended up backing into him and killing him. And then there's the other theories that no, they went into the house and some kind of altercation happened. They ended up beating him up in the house, and then they just planted him in the front yard. But then there's always been something that bothered me from watching the Waterfall bar and grill footage. When you watch right around midnight, when everybody starts to take off, everyone leaves John in there by himself. But not only do they leave him in there by himself, with just maybe an employee or two in there, Chris Albert actually says something to him and leaves. But he also walks outside right after that to go speak to Karen real quick. And when he does that, it's interesting because he pokes his head out of the door of the Waterfall Bar and Grill and then looks up. You see him look, and you can barely see Karen, but she's standing there just looking at him in the parking lot. He throws his hands up at her like, "What are you doing?" And she says something to him. He's like, "Okay, well, whatever then," and walks back inside. And then she looks at him for about 5-10 seconds, just stares, just sits there, stares at him, and then eventually turns around and walks away. And I always thought that was super weird because that little tiny piece of this story is never brought up. And I think it should be. I think that's a big part of this, because it shows me that he went back in and she left without him, right? And that is not something that people have been saying. So I kind of have my own alternative theories to maybe what might have happened. This is all alleged, of course, but I mean, I'm not buying, what they're selling when it comes to this whole case. So this is definitely my own theory, my own opinions about what happened that night that John O'Keefe died in the Karen Read trial. And this is, like I said, just alleged. Like I said, this is a question that no one in Canton, Massachusetts wants to answer. I mean, if Karen Read never dropped off John O'Keefe at the house, then we have a whole nother story. What if John never got in the car? In today's video, we explore the alternate timeline and where Karen and John left separately from the Waterfall Bar and Grill, and a different chain of events led to John's death. This is the theory that challenges the entire case, and the one that points directly at Mr. Chris Albert himself. Colin's Pops. Yeah, that's what we'll call him. So, on January 28th, 2022, John O'Keefe and Karen Read arrive at the Waterfall Bar and Grill to meet some friends, including Jen McKay, Brian Albert, and potentially Chris Albert, right? Now, the potentially is the fact that we're not sure if he was there when they went there, if he happened to, because it looks like in the footage from the hillside or wherever it was before that they had already been hanging out with Chris. And a lot of people aren't really sure on why this whole night came about, but there was rumors that he had gone into Chris's pizza parlor, and then Chris invited him out for the night. Which was kind of weird because there's all these rumors of how Chris doesn't like John and that they're neighbors and that his kids hate John, and it sounds like a good cop, bad cop type of thing. It sounds like the Alberts are just a problem in the county. No one likes them. They're crooked. They're corrupt. They have somebody at every level in the town. It's just kind of that big boy club in a small town. And it sounds like O'Keefe might have been just a decent human being, and that is not cool when you're corrupt, right? There's always like a good cop, bad cop thing. And so I'm not sure. I mean, that's just kind of what it seems like, but who knows? What we do know at this time is the timeline falls apart right after this moment. The bar was packed, the drinks were flowing, and tensions were unknown. Prosecutors say Karen and John left together in her SUV, and she dropped him off at 34 Fairview Road around 12:30 a.m., and then allegedly striking him with the vehicle. But surveillance footage, cell phone pings, and digital forensics tell a whole different story. Karen Read's phone continues to ping in several locations after allegedly leaving the bar, not just near 34 Fairview, but looping around, making multiple stops. Call records show that after 12:30 a.m., Karen was calling and texting John. That's not behavior consistent with someone who just killed him, or somebody that's even in the car with him. And then there's the critical 4 a.m. call to Jen McCabe, where Karen says, "John's not answering me. Should I be worried?" If she hit him, why is she calling the very people later accused of being involved? Now let's go back to the parking lot. Eyewitnesses' accounts are conflicting. No one can definitely place John in Karen's SUV. No surveillance shows them leaving together ever. What if they didn't? What if Karen, possibly intoxicated, was driving home or escorted by Jen McCabe while John stayed behind? Maybe he was catching a ride with someone else. Maybe he was waiting for Chris Albert. Who knows? There's a lot of theories. I mean, for all we know, a fight pursued at the waterfall outside. Karen hit him with her car there, and then they all helped her try and get out of it by framing her. That just doesn't really add up, right? So there's all these weird kind of like trying to put the pieces together is weird. One thing that's always bugged me is the whole, dog bites on the arm. If there's dog bites on his arm, then there was obviously no dog over in the parking lot at the waterfall, right? So there is some missing pieces to this puzzle that we're all trying to kind of put together. But, you know what I mean. Chris Albert is a key figure, rarely talked about publicly, but his role is very critical in the case. His brother, Brian Albert, tied to local law enforcement and allegedly present at or around the same time at the location that night. So where was he? Rumors and whispers in Canton suggest Chris may have met up with John outside the waterfall or even drove him to 34 Fairview. Some speculate a confrontation occurred. Was it about previous argument, a personal dispute, or something bigger? Like what John may have known. I mean, when you watch the footage that night, around midnight, it makes sense because Chris is kind of helping clean up. It looks like he knows the owner, so he's kind of one of the last ones there. And then John's kind of sitting there by himself because everybody else already left. It does look like Chris says something like, "Oh, well, I'll give you a ride. Just let me go wrap things up back here and I'll meet you outside," or something. It doesn't look like they're fighting. As a matter of fact, when Higgins and O'Keefe get into it by the door, when that little conversation, it seems like Chris is actually trying to stop it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he didn't want it to happen. It just means like, hey, wait, not here, not here. So I'm not painting Chris to be a good guy. I'm just saying it didn't seem to be upset, at that time. At 34 Fairview Road, a house full of people, at least 3 adults were home. Brian Albert, his wife, and potentially Chris Albert. Some say the kids were there too. Yet no one hears a body being hit, no one sees a car, and no one calls 911. Now, I will say, Brian Higgins was also there. The McCabes were also there. Allie was there. Caitlin was there, sounds like. The son, the other Albert son, Colin, was there. There was a lot of people there. There was a birthday going on that night, and so there was a lot of friends over. I've never really bought into the whole story of them coming to pick her up, her friend. Her brother came to pick up one of Brian Albert's, I think that's his son's name too, Junior maybe, One of his friends' brother come to pick up this girl that he hangs out with, and I've never really bought into that story. I think he knows more than he's saying. I think he was there that night. I just don't know why they're trying to come up with an excuse on why he would show up and then leave at that time of night. So I think there's more to be said when it comes to all that. But because of a lot of the missing data, it's hard to figure it out. You know what I mean? But no one remembers hearing a body being hit. No one saw a car. No one calls 911. And John's body's found face up in the snow hours later. His injuries were not consistent with being run over by a car. He had cuts on his arms, a black eye, and swelling behind his ear. Forensics experts say this looks more like blunt force trauma from a fight, not a fender bender. And that would align with a lot of the theories of him going in the house and getting beaten up by the people. And I really do think he got beat up. I don't necessarily think he got murdered on purpose. I do think it could have been an accident and that they didn't mean to kill him. And that's kind of why everybody, including Karen, tried to get in on this and just kind of cover it up, because nobody actually did it on purpose. And Karen, to me, seems like a pretty cold person to begin with, so I could see her just being like, cool, just whatever, as long as we can get out of it, you know? So, yeah, I really never really, I don't know, I think they're all in on it. I think the Alberts, the McCabe's, and it's Karen Read, everybody. I think everybody. When people try and pin one side against the other, I think that's where you're messing up. I think this is one big plan put together by everybody involved. But before John's body is officially discovered, a Google search happens on Jen McCabe's phone. How long to die in the cold weather? Now, this infamous text, it just can't be forgotten. It's a key piece of this case, and there's no explanation for it, right? Like she says that didn't even happen. She's caught so red-handed right there. She's just denying that happened, that their Cellbrite or their data that they have isn't even correct. She's caught. She's done. That's why she's just lying to your face. Because, I mean, at this point, what does she do? She's caught red-handed. So, and this is before the police arrive. Before anyone outside the house knows what happened. How did she know to ask that if this hadn't happened, right? Was somebody already panicking? What was going on? Was the plan to say he must have wandered out and passed away? Or were they figuring out how much longer he had left while he was still alive? And that is what it seemed like for me was, I feel like if they had left him out where he was and they texted that sounds to me like something happened. He got beat up. He hit his head. He's probably lost motor functions and everything, was probably out of it. And they panicked and didn't know what to do. So they were put him outside, and were hoping that it would come down to dying from natural causes and no one would notice that he had been beat up, which is to me pretty naive. But I mean, it's an idea, I guess, right? I mean, it's just, I don't know, just to think that he wandered out and passed out, I guess is a better theory or a better idea than saying, hey, we beat him up and then we drug him out there. So I guess. But security cameras from the neighborhood are missing or never released. From the neighborhood. You know what I mean? That's the thing. They went around, talked to their neighbors. That's why this is crazy. Body cam footage was delayed. Cell phones were wiped. And Chris Albert, no sworn statement and no public appearance. See, Chris was just as much involved in that night as everybody else. And so for them to push him and act like the same with Colin, the fact they're hiding Chris and Colin, to me tells me that they're guilty, because I don't know. You're obviously going to try and keep the most guilty suspects out of the limelight. So Chris Albert and Colin, and they both just seem like straight punks anyway, I'll be honest. I've seen some live footage of them in front of this little pizza shop. Very unlikable people. They run a pizza place in town. He's on one of the selectmen or whatever on the board of directors, and Brian Albert's a cop. So I mean, the whole thing is just a mess. They're in bed with the judge and everything, and that's why I knew that, because Karen's involved in this, that the judge was going to let Karen off. So this thing is really, really tricky, and I don't think everyone quite sees it for what it is, but Chris Albert is definitely more involved in this thing than people want to act like, you know. But a lot of people in Canton are asking, where was Chris between midnight and 6 a.m.? Why hasn't he been interviewed under oath? And was he in the house or in the car with John? It's just, the silence is deafening to a lot of people. People want to know. Until Chris starts talking, until Colin actually tells the truth, we don't really know what's going to happen. I don't even know if Brian Higgins is the one that actually hurt John. To be honest, I think he was there, went to the police station that night to try and help cover it up or do whatever, but I definitely don't in any kind of way necessarily think it was just him. Because he seems like the oof out of everybody anyway, and like not the tough guy, you know? So, but if John and Karen didn't leave together, then all these other theories collapse, right? Because that just doesn't make sense. He obviously was never at the house. If he was never at the house, then we got a whole nother story going on. The state's case is built on that moment, that Karen drove him, that she dropped him off, that she ran him over. But if John stayed behind, did he get in a different car? Did he walk into the house alive that night? Or did a fight break out with someone like Chris Albert? Then the narrative changes completely. Karen Read wouldn't be a killer. She'd be a witness to a cover-up. And I've heard many people say that there wasn't a person in that house that could have took John one-on-one. So if Chris Albert was going to try and fight John one-on-one, it sounds to me like he wouldn't have been successful. From what I've heard, John was a tough guy, and he could have handled any of the Alberts, no problem, or the McCabe's. So if John is much tougher than them guys, then I can see why they might have jumped him, you know, but I just don't know where that might have happened at. It's a whole nother theory, like I said, you know, but, you know, the narrative changes drastically all the time. I know a lot of people are stuck on either she hit him or it was in the house. I don't know. It's like, is Karen Read even the killer? You know, it's like, or is she a witness to a cover-up? At this point, it's really hard to tell. I mean, let's ask the question that nobody in court is asking. What was Chris Albert doing that night? Where was his phone? Where was his car? Why is his name barely mentioned in the trial proceedings? If John was beaten inside the house or even in the driveway, why does all the suspicion land on Karen then? Is it because she was the easiest one to blame, or because the truth would destroy the reputation of the people in power? The official story says Karen Read hit her boyfriend with an SUV and left him to die. The alternate story, she didn't even drive him there. That John stayed behind. The confrontation happened, and that people with connections like Chris Albert might know exactly what happened that night, but no one's talking. And until they do, the case will stay buried under more than just snow. This has been True Crime Tuesday. Thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe. I'll see you next time.